Chapter 451, Ever and Araleth. Chapter 451, Ever and Araleth. On a far distant planet, a brown dragon was fleeing across the sky. His expression was heavy as he constantly scanned his surroundings. The sky was blood red. Below, the ground is ruined and filled with countless cracks and crevices. Occasionally, he would fly over the corpses of gods and dragons alike. This world was already destroyed, and all of that was because of a rampage of a single dragoness. A flashing light pierced through the clouds, causing his eyes to widen in shock. He hastily evaded the attack as a gray metal spear zoomed by his side and exploded on the ground, creating more crevices. Damn it, Ever! Stop this madness! He cursed but did not dare stop. His attacker did not reply. Her figure appeared in the sky above him, parting the clouds. Her silver-colored scales were dyed red with blood. Her eyes gleamed with madness as she glared at him, causing shivers to run down his spine. The brown dragon cursed his luck and turned to face her. His mouth opened as he readied a dragon breath attack. Ever seemed to anticipate that. She immediately launched a breath attack of her own. The two dragon breaths collided midair, creating a massive shockwave that rippled through the sky and ground alike. It parted the clouds and caused the ground to explode. Ever remained calm and steadied herself midair. The brown dragon, on the other hand, was sent crashing to the ground. Right before he touched down, a sudden metal spire sprung from under him and impaled him through the chest. Ever coldly watched the scene with a sneer before she flew down toward him. You monster. The brown dragon coughed blood. He could feel her mana rampaging through his body, preventing him from healing himself. Your feeble attempt to oppose the king with such little power is truly lamentable. May your weakness be cursed for leading you down this path. Ever coldly spoke before she swung her tail, decapitating the traitor in one swift motion. Her emotions were still running high, so she raised her head and let out a frustrated roar that resounded across the devastated planet. How many has it been? She lost count already. Everything happened so suddenly. The death of her mate, the emergence of the traitors. Now, she didn't even know where her children were. Were they still alive? Another roar escaped her mouth as she tried to process the events. However, she found solace in her mother's words, which assured her that Ether had survived the council's attack. She believed in her heart that the child was extraordinary. As for the others, her mother had advised her not to worry, and she would try to heed her advice. The children were already grown. If she, their own mother, couldn't trust them, then who could? All she could do now was to hold the fort. Mother and father would definitely handle the other traitors. Until then, all she had to do was complete her part. Ridiculous bastards, escape the king's soul space, they say. Idiots, all of them. She grumbled in annoyance, her eyes glancing at the head of the brown dragon. What a disgraceful excuse of a dragon, she said before she smashed the head on the ground. With a cold gaze, she shot up to the sky and left the destroyed battlefield behind. Another world conquered. Unfortunately, this one did not pose much difficulty. It seemed true that the further one went from the main plane, the weaker one would become. Ever gave the planet one last glance and then left its atmosphere. In the vast space, floating a short distance away from it was a massive dragon. His figure was even bigger than the planet itself. Ever nodded respectfully and sent him a mental message. Master Arsel, it is done. The colossal dragon slowly nodded in response, and Ever hastily moved out of the way. Her eyes were shining in admiration as she watched him open his enormous maw and swallow the planet whole. The sight was breathtaking, no matter how many times she saw it. Arsel, the quiet. Even she didn't know much about him except that he was old. Very old. Mother had asked her to accompany him, and she appreciated the chance to vent her grievances, but deep down, she couldn't help but wonder. Was she even needed? She thought as she glanced at the place where there used to be a planet. A sigh escaped her mouth. On to the next one. In another hidden realm, a group of dragons sat around a table in their human forms. Taking the main chair was a dragoness with gray hair and purple eyes. Her ears were slightly pointy, and two horns curled to the back of her head. Will Hadion not be joining us? A dragon that had the appearance of an old man asked. My husband is still occupied. I will be taking his place, she said calmly. Most of the dragons gathered around the table frowned, but seemed to hesitate in speaking against her. All, except for one who looked like a frail old lady. You hold no more power in this council, Araleth. Araleth smiled gently and leaned over the table. Oh dear, it seems like you grew fangs in my absence, she said playfully. The old dragoness was quickly taken aback and frowned. You know what I mean, White Death. Araleth frowned before speaking. I'd appreciate it if you did not call me by that embarrassing title. Though her words were calm, the aura she was exuding caused all those present to hold their breath. Enough, a middle-aged-looking dragon with red hair and equally red eyes interrupted. We are not here to argue. He paused and glanced at the old woman. Nor are we here to bring out old grievances. Araleth smiled. Why, thank you, she said and glanced at those present. I have no intention of coming back to this council. I'm here to fulfill my duty to the king, and once that is done, I will leave. She paused and looked at the old woman. And I hope I won't have another reason to come back here again. Although the mood was heavy, no one argued. Alareth nodded in satisfaction before continuing. Most of the traitors have been taken care of. Arsel and my daughter-in-law are taking care of the minor planets. Was it necessary to destroy them? A blue-haired dragoness asked. Of course it was. We've left those bastards grow unchecked for long enough. Another dragon answered. Most of those worlds were minor ones, filled with mortals. Another dragon replied while shaking his head. A necessary sacrifice. Another one chimed in. Watching the table delve into a heated debate, Araleth felt her headache grow. Although she was putting on a brave front, her injuries were still not fully healed. Otherwise, she would be the one out there fighting while Hadion would be taking care of things over here. Not to mention, most of the main members were not even here. She cursed inwardly. What a mess, leaving me to take care of a bunch of younglings. I'd rather see my cute grandchildren instead. She inwardly sighed. Chapter 452 Who? Chapter 452 Who? So we will have to go back to the main plane? I asked with a raised brow. Irvai nodded and resumed his explanation. The stream of mana there is special. That's where they can both regain full control over their elements, he said while glancing at Emmy and Sidis. I see. I answered and turned to look at Sidis, who gave me a subtle nod. What would happen to the mana stream? Essie suddenly asked, her voice laced with concern. Kalta's expression turned grim. To tell the truth, I'm afraid it will collapse. Irvai sighed by her side and continued. That's another reason why the king does not dare act rashly. The main plane is important to him for some reason. I understand, I calmly responded. Since Cyrus sent you here, we would have preferred her to stay by your side, but we have long since lost contact with her. There's a chance she already fell by the hands of the king's faction or the Shades. Irvai's tone was heavy as he spoke. Does she know about all of this? I asked with a raised brow. Irvai shook his head. Most of those living here in Foz came here because they wished not to involve themselves in outside matters anymore. The secrets of the past, however, are not to be shared so easily. So, Foz's occupants have no idea the significance of this place. Emmy asked. Kalta nodded in response. There is no need for them to know. You said that this city was built to help the pillars, Sidis spoke with a frown. But just the two of you are useless against the king's forces. Kalta and Irvai did not take offense to his words. Instead, the old dragon laughed before answering. That is true. I'm assuming you have other supporters hidden in the city. Otherwise, you wouldn't be so bold, Sidis added. Irvai gave him an enigmatic smile in response. You'll see in due time. Kalta joined in on the conversation. We have been preparing for this for a long time. I can imagine, I mumbled as I glanced at the temple's sky. For now, you kids can rest and continue to enjoy what the city has to offer. We will inform you once we are ready to set off, Irvai said. Kalta smiled by his side. It's great to finally have you by our sides, she said. Her smile looked soft, but I could still see a faint hint of madness hidden beneath her gentle facade. Back inside the tower, all eyes were on me. Enos was surprisingly calm. He said nothing and waited for me to speak. Essie was nervous. I could sense the anxiety oozing out of her body, but she still kept a strong front, pretending to be okay. Seeing her like that brought a smile to my face. She has grown. All of us did. A sigh escaped my mouth as I looked at my siblings. My eyes eventually settled on Brita. The goddess appeared indifferent as always. I never thought I'd one day be on the side standing against the king, she said. Life works in mysterious ways. I shook my head. So, what is it, brother? Enos suddenly spoke. I raised my brow in surprise. You know what I mean, he said, motioning for Sidis. What is going on? Sidis frowned before speaking. Since when did you become so smart? Enos shrugged and answered, I don't like complicated things. And whatever all of this is, it's very complicated. He paused and turned to look at me. So what is it? Emmy leaned closer to me while Brita adjusted herself on the couch, silently pushing Enos's muscular figure away. Only little Essie appeared to be confused about what was going on. I looked at Sidis and nodded. Would you like to do the honors? He shrugged. A dark aura surged out of his body, causing Emmy to frown, but she didn't say anything. I glanced at the darkness mana that enveloped us all and isolated us from the outside world with an impressed nod. You got stronger, I said. Sidis shook his head. Not strong enough, it seems. What's with the secrecy? Enos asked. We are not going against the king. Of course not, Sidis growled. Enos didn't seem bothered. A shame. It would have been fun. His words caused Sidis's mouth to hang open in disbelief. F fun? He asked. Yeah, I always wondered how strong the king actually is. No one would tell me anything. Enos replied. His voice carried hints of frustration. This crazy dash. Cough. Enough. I interrupted the two before we got sidetracked. Sidis shook his head and chose to ignore Enos. His gaze turned to Emmy. Do you remember the cave I told you about? Emmy frowned for a second before her eyes lit up. You mean? Yes, the one I went to with Brother Ether, he nodded. Ah dash. Emmy seemed to quickly put the two together. What? Confused, Essie turned to me and asked. Well, about that. So the two old fossils are lying to us, Enos spoke. Basically, yes. Brita, by the side, released a small sigh of relief. At least we aren't going against the king, she whispered. But what if they didn't lie about everything? Essie asked hesitantly. What do you mean? We came here. What if the king's faction considers us traitors? Her words brought a deafening silence to the room. I sighed. That's why I need to talk to the king again. Again? Emmy asked with her eyes wide open. A chuckle escaped my mouth. Yes, I think he likes me. I joked, causing the others to stare at me in disbelief. Regardless, it's safe to assume we are once more behind enemy lines. I paused and looked at everyone before continuing. That means we have to stick together. Stay close, and stay prepared for anything and everything. I want to take Lost with me. Enos interrupted. His words caught me by surprise, and I could only dumbly answer. You can't. Emmy sighed and shook her head. Enos frowned. Why not? Because she belongs here. It's her home, she replied before adding. Besides, what makes you think she would want to come with you and leave everything behind? Her words caused the frown on Enos's face to deepen. He fell into deep thought before his eyes lightened. Then I can just kidnap her. What dash? Emmy, shocked by his answer, could not find the words to reply. Enough. We'll think about that later. I quickly tried to change the topic. For now, we need to stay low. We cannot afford to go against the whole city. Not at this time, at least. Everyone nodded. Good. Oh, what are you guys talking about? A sudden voice caused my scales to stiffen and my breath to halt. I could see Brita's eyes widen in shock and my siblings' expressions of disbelief. Sidis, in particular, looked as if he had seen a ghost. I stiffly turned around to face the newcomer. A strange wingless dragoness with striking glossy white eyes. She had no scales. Instead, her skin was purple with white stripes and long blue hair that extended from her head to her back. Fire wisps of mana circled around her. Who? Chapter 453, Emily. Chapter 453, Emily. Brita was the first to move. Her spear soared through the air, aiming for the strange dragoness. Emmy didn't hesitate either, as she manifested a dozen golden arrows before shooting them at the stranger. Oh dear. The unknown dragoness seemed to anticipate where the attacks would land in advance. She seamlessly weaved through Emmy's arrows and easily dodged Brita's spear. Enos roared and rushed in head first with his horns pointed at her. The dragoness didn't seem bothered and instead looked like she was already expecting his attack. 2 of the 7 fire mana wisps surrounding her rushed to meet Enos, forming an impressive flame wall. Enos was undeterred by this. He quickly manipulated his earth mana to cover his entire body, forming a strange armor of sorts before he crashed against the wall. The dragoness's eyes widened as Enos broke through and rushed towards her. 3 fire wisps moved swiftly beneath her claws and launched her into the air, causing Enos's attack to miss. Right then, however, a sudden gust of wind forced her back to the ground. Oh, Look at this cutie. Her gaze turned to Essie, who was surrounded by dangerous wind elements. Brita zoomed toward her, brandishing her spear. Enos, on the other hand, aimed for her back. Emmy turned into a streak of light that attacked her from above. Even when faced with attacks from all directions, the dragoness was unfazed. Her gaze remained settled on Essie with a soft smile on her face. Her movement was hard to follow. She stepped back and twirled around Enos, narrowly avoiding his horns. Right after she raised her claw, where two wisps of fire mana transformed into a fiery hammer that smashed him into the ground. The force of the attack caused his armor to crack and the ground to splinter. Emmy's attack arrived right after, but the dragoness seemed to have anticipated it already. 3 more wisps shot forth like a whip, pushing Emmy back. What the? Emmy cursed. Brita's spear shattered the whip and continued toward the dragoness, but she slipped through it once more, causing Brita to frown. Before she could follow up with her attack, the dragoness had already retreated next to little Essie. I watched over the entire ordeal with a strange feeling. My cosmic mana was calm. I didn't sense any danger from the unknown dragoness. Even her attacks didn't seem to carry the intent to kill. I subconsciously glanced at Sidus, who still had a dumbfounded expression. Did he know her? Looking back at her, I resisted the urge to attack her as she stood in front of Essie. Pat. Huh. Confused, Essie glanced at the dragoness, who was happily patting her head. Emmy was about to launch another attack when I stopped her. Wait. She turned to look at me and then back at the dragoness before she glanced back at Sidus. What are you standing there with such a stupid look on your face for? Sidus didn't know how to reply. Aren't you supposed to be our first line of defense? Emmy continued to berate him. Oh, please don't get mad at him. I think he was just surprised to see me. The dragoness interrupted her with an apologetic smile. You know her? Emmy ignored her and asked Sidus. He shook his head and answered. We've only met once by accident. He paused and glanced at the dragoness. Was it truly an accident? She nodded in response. Yep, I never thought I'd come across you there. Brother. Essie, who was still under the merciless head pat attacks, looked at me with a pleading expression. I summoned my cosmic mana, teleported her away from the dragoness, and safely placed her on my head. I wanted more head pats. The dragoness complained. Enough. Who are you? I asked with a frown. Pleasure to meet you. I'm Emily. She replied with a courteous bow, causing the golden bell on her neck to chime. That's not what I asked. Who are you? And why did you attack us? I didn't attack you, though. I merely defended myself. You guys attacked me first. Well, they did, at least. Did Irvi or Kalta send you? Those old things. No, they didn't. Then who? My frown deepened. The king did. She answered with a refreshing smile. The king, Enos, who had been knocked down, stirred and shook his head before standing. His earth armor disappeared as he walked to my side. You've got a strong body, he said. Thank you. I try to take care of myself, she grinned. Wait. The king sent you to us. Emmy asked once more. Brita, standing next to me, unsummoned her spear and sighed. Another strange one appears. Well, technically, I was already here. I'm confused, Emmy sighed. I've been stationed here in Foz by the king long before you came. So you're a spy. Enos nodded in understanding. Shush, Emily answered with a smile. And what's your mission? He asked. That's a secret. Her smile widened. Then what are you doing here? I frowned. Her entire demeanor changed at that. It's dangerous here. Emmy scoffed. A little bit late for that. Emily nodded. So it would seem. You guys need to leave Foz. I'm okay with that, Brita answered. Enos shrugged while Sidus still held that confused look on his face. I can't leave yet. I shook my head. My response seemed to catch her off guard. What? First of all, we don't know who you are. Emily tilted her head in confusion. But I already told you I'm with the king, though. How could I trust your words? For all I know, you could be lying. The king really is smart, she suddenly said. What? He told me that something like this might happen. She appeared strangely excited at that. And, well, Tim, my eyes widened in disbelief as I subconsciously took a step back. What did you just say? Emily frowned slightly. Oh, did I remember it wrong? Was it not Tim? She mumbled to herself. Where did you hear that? I asked slowly. It was getting difficult for me to control my feelings. The cosmic mana, sensing the sudden change in emotions, churned and gathered around, causing the space surrounding me to crack with ominous energy. Oh, so I was right. Emily let out a sigh of relief. I thought I remembered it wrong. I'm not going to repeat myself. What do you know? And where did you hear that? I don't know anything, though. The king told me to tell you that. Whatever it means. Is it a name? She seemed genuinely puzzled. None of your business. That was mean. What else did the king tell you? Oh, you believe me now? Yes. No one else knows my previous name except for him. After all, Chapter 454, The Missing Piece. Chapter 454, The Missing Piece. It took everyone a moment to calm down. Emily had somehow managed to find her way next to little Essie again and was attacking her with head pats. A wide smile was on her face as she hummed in satisfaction. Enos was looking at her in curiosity, his tail constantly moving left and right. Emmy had her eyes on Sidis with a frown, while the latter wore a complicated expression as he gazed at Emily. Only Brita looked unbothered and was happily sipping her tea. So, I lightly coughed, drawing Emily's attention from Essie. She looked reluctant to stop patting her, but still turned to face me. She is adorable, Emily answered with a smile while looking at Essie. I'm going to have to ask you to stop, I sighed. Oh, you're making her uncomfortable. Fine, she pouted. Now you were saying? Leaning back on the couch. Emily took a moment before she replied. I was saying you need to leave Foz. That was our plan as well, I replied. Great. Then dash. But dash. I stopped her before she could continue. But, she raised her brow. I can't leave just yet. I shook my head. Emily appeared confused as she asked, why? It's the king's order, though. I know, and I'm not saying I won't. I just can't leave yet. Why? I took a deep breath and looked at my siblings and Brita before I turned to face Emily. My cosmic mana led us here. It was no coincidence that we found Lost on that planet, nor was it a coincidence that we came to Foz. I will not leave until I've found why my mana led us here. You don't think it was to show you the murals? Sidis, who had been silent all this time, suddenly asked. I looked at him and shook my head. I thought it was that in the beginning, but now? I don't think so. There's something else here. Regardless. The king ordered you to leave, Emily replied. I will after I find what I'm looking for. Emily released a long sigh. Her pale white eyes looked eerie as she asked in a sudden cold tone. Does that mean you are disobeying the king's orders? I straightened my back and calmly replied. I am not. I will leave after I'm done. I repeated my answer. Emily shook her head and replied, I can't have that, either. And I stood up and asked, do you think you can stop me? Tension filled the room, and I could see Enos itching for action. Essie shifted her position next to me while Emmy had her eyes on Emily the entire time. Sidis hesitated for a second before he stood up and joined us. The silence was deafening before. Clang. The sudden sound of Brita placing her teacup down turned all eyes on her. She calmly spoke. Starting a fight here isn't beneficial to anyone. Her eyes examined Emily for a few seconds before she continued. You are strong, but not strong enough to take all of us. The second we start fighting seriously, the entire city will notice. I'm sure that's not what the king wants. Emily chuckled and sat back down. Her previous serious aura quickly disappeared. Okay then, what are you looking for? I hesitated before answering. I'm not sure. So you don't know what you're looking for, and you don't know how to find whatever it is you're looking for. Am I right? When you put it like that, shaking her head, Emily replied, not everyone in the city is your enemy, but the ones that are, you do not want to mess with. What you are doing is playing a very dangerous game. I am aware of that. I paused and looked at my siblings and finally Brita. I don't want to put them in danger, but whatever is calling to me, it's important. Irvai and Kalta will be sending you away soon. Emily shook her head. I doubt you have enough time to find anything. The main reason I came here today was to get you out before they send you off. So it's true? They will be sending us back to the main plane. Emmy asked. I'm not sure. The king didn't tell me much. Emily shrugged. Are you here alone? Sidis joined in the conversation. Emily smiled at him and replied, of course not. Then what was your plan? Sidis asked. Oh, well, it wasn't really my plan, you know. I'm just your escort. And I'm supposed to take you to a safe world until things calm down. Not back to the main world. I asked. No, too dangerous right now. Although you are capable of defending yourselves to a certain extent, it is still best to avoid the fight for now. What exactly is going on over there? Emmy pressed. I'm not sure either. All I know is that there are quite a few traitors amongst us. Emily answered in a cold tone. Traitors. I muttered as I recalled the scene of me opening that gate back in the council. Is Mother all right? Essie asked hesitantly. Emily gave her a forced smile. Sorry, dear, but I don't know either. Your mother is strong, however, so I'm sure she should be fine. Her words were unable to calm Essie, who leaned closer to me. So you know about the murals in the temple? I asked in an attempt to change the subject. I'll stop you right there. I do not know, and I do not wish to know. Like I said, I'm only here to do my job, which you already making harder for me by refusing to leave. I'm sorry, but I dash. Yes. You can't leave until you find the mysterious thing that's brought you here. Emily stood up and took a deep breath. I'll be going first. The longer I stay here, the more dangerous it will be for all of us. I will stay in touch. Just don't do anything stupid. With that, the strange dragoness walked out of Sidus's sphere of darkness. Brita was the first to speak. That was interesting. She was strong, brother, Enos said. I know, but I am stronger, I confidently replied. But maybe she has a point? Emmy hesitantly spoke. About leaving? I asked. She nodded. It is dangerous here, brother. We don't know what they could be hiding here. Brita joined in. She's right. They may have something that could disturb your teleportation, and if so, we would be in big trouble. Another sigh escaped my mouth. I know. I just feel like there is something I'm missing, something I'm supposed to find. Chapter 455, The Missing Piece 2. Chapter 455, The Missing Piece 2. After Emily took her leave, our group continued our discussion. Everyone shared their thoughts and ideas about what the cosmic mana was trying to show me. By the end of it, we were no closer to the truth than when we just started. You can try going for a walk across the city. Maybe the mana will guide you again, Emmy suggested. Sidus nodded and added, she's right. That's our best chance. If the mana brought here, then try to listen to it. See where it leads you. All right. You guys stay here and stay together. No, it's too dangerous, brother. Emmy shook her head. You can't go alone. Essie nudged my side with her snout. I gently curled my tail around her and replied, it's because it's too dangerous that I will go. I paused and looked at Sidus, Emmy, and Enos before continuing. I need you all to stay together in one place. That way, it will be easier for me to get us out of here in case things go south. Then I will go with you. Brita stood up. What dash? They will stay together, and I will go with you. You still need someone to watch your back. Her words were firm, and it didn't seem like she was going to take a no for an answer. I looked at my siblings, and Enos shrugged while Sidus awkwardly glanced away. Emmy seemed to think about it for a moment before she nodded. Although I don't like the idea of us getting separated, it's still best to have someone with you, she said. I sighed, fine. Let's not waste any more time then. Sidus gave us a nod and dropped his dark veil. The bubble that surrounded us melted away and disappeared in seconds. Just as I and Brito were about to leave, my steps suddenly paused as I stared at the figure standing by the entrance. Zephyrion, I said. The masked god gave us a bow. I have to say, that was an interesting spell, he said as he glanced at Sidus. Thank you, Sidus coldly replied. What are you doing inside here? I don't remember us inviting you to come in. I tilted my head and calmly asked, forgive my intrusion. I merely came to see if you need anything. We do not. Thank you. Emmy answered with a smile. In that case, I'll be taking my leave. He nodded and gave one last bow before leaving. I turned to look at my siblings, who all had solemn expressions on their faces. If anything happens, just release your aura. I will be right back. Don't worry about us, Emmy said. I smiled and patted Essie before leaving alongside Brita. There's no doubt Zephyrion was there to spy on us. They must have kept him there to keep watch, but when Sidus used his spell, he couldn't do so anymore. As we flew out of the tower and into the city, my eyes subconsciously glanced at the now dark sky. It was nighttime already, but the streets were still as busy as day. I suppose that was to be expected, considering all the inhabitants were either dragons or divine. As our feet touched the pavement, an explosion of sounds and scents enveloped me. It was almost too much to take in at once. Dragons of all shapes and sizes roamed the streets, their scales glinting under the moonlight. Some were towering and majestic, while others were tiny and adorable. I couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder and excitement at the foreign sight. Deities strode amongst them, adorned in a kaleidoscope of vibrant and exotic garments. Each deity boasted a unique appearance, with some looking as unremarkable as mortals, while others radiated with an otherworldly aura, almost as if they were made completely out of pure divine energy. I glanced at Brita and asked, you don't seem surprised? It's interesting to see dragons and gods walking side by side. But the novelty died off when we fought together against the shades, she shrugged. I'm not talking about just that. I mean the city as a whole. It's noisy. Brita interrupted me before I could continue. Oh, come on. You mean to tell me you don't like it? I asked as we picked a random direction and began to walk. Not really. So you'd prefer the silence back in the astral plane? I frowned. Brita rolled her eyes. Now you're just being foolish. What? I mean, although it is a bit noisy, I think it's the kind of noise that would grow on you. Brita shook her head and replied, I don't like it. Why? I asked as my eyes looked around with curiosity. There were quite a few odd shops along the street, even some restaurants. Although the shapes of said establishments were unique, to say the least. I suppose that's normal considering the sizes of their customers. It's not right, Brita answered. The city, the way they are living. Her words were confusing, so I turned my gaze toward her. What do you mean? Gods that abandon their duties. What kind of gods does that make them? I knew the whole duty topic was a sensitive one to Brita, especially considering how the king banned them from interfering with the mortals back in the central plane. Is that how you see it? I see it how it is. And all I see in this city are deities that ran from their duties. I hold no respect for them. There are no mortals here, though. It doesn't matter. They chose to run away and hide here. I shook my head. I don't know about that. I don't think it's too bad to want to enjoy peace. Brita raised her head and looked at me for a few seconds before she averted her gaze. Our walk continued in silence after that. Although I was enjoying the sights, my attention was still on the mana. The cosmic elements were still silent. And so we continued to walk the streets. It wasn't until we passed by a dimly lit alley that I paused. Brita looked at me and asked, What is it? It's lost. Just then, the ice dragoness walked out of the alley with a sad, empty look. It wasn't until she almost bumped into me that she did. Sorry, her voice was soft. Lost, Oh, Ether, what happened? Are you okay? I asked. Lost raised her head and looked at me, and I could see that she was struggling to keep her tears at bay. Teeth, I said that my mom has fallen, she stuttered. What dash? It can't be true. I don't feel like she's dead. Is this it? Is this what you wanted to show me? Chapter 456. Calm down, Lost. Talk to me, I said in an attempt to comfort her. Lost eyes were glazed as she stared at the distance. I don't understand. Zephyrion said she was busy, but I would see her soon. Why? Doesn't make sense. She cried out, and I gently covered her with my wing. It's okay. We still don't know that yet. Talk to me first. I need to understand. Who told you that she had fallen? Lost raised her eyes and looked straight at me for the first time. Irvai. I frowned and turned to Brita, who had a serious expression. Irvai, I muttered, and Lost nodded. They summoned me to the temple, and I was very excited since I never get summoned there. I thought perhaps my mother came back, but when I went there, her breathing picked up, and I could tell she was struggling to keep her emotions at bay. Calm down, it's okay. I'm right here, I said as I held her close. I glanced at Brita and motioned for the alley. She nodded and took the lead while Lost and I slowly followed behind. I don't understand, she muttered. What else did he tell you? I asked. Nothing. He said nothing. Her breathing picked up, and I could sense her aura flaring in anger. How could he say nothing? He tells me she had fallen, but doesn't tell me where. Or how. It doesn't make sense. She looks at me and continues. And my mom is strong. She can't fall that easily. No. I would know if she had died. I nod alongside her. Now that we were all in the alley, Brita walked next to me, and I quickly used my cosmic mana to teleport us back to the tower. Our sudden appearance seemed to catch both Emmy and Sidis by surprise. Essie is not in the main hall, probably back in her room, while Enos's eyes widen in pleasant surprise as he stares at Lost. Well, that was fast, said Emmy. Yeah, something happened, I replied and motioned to Lost. Enos stood up and approached her, and I moved back, giving them some space. Brita made her way to the couch and collapsed with a soft thud. I still dislike that teleportation feeling. She shook her head. I shrugged. Be grateful. It's what got us out of trouble too many times. My words caused her to click her tongue in annoyance. Sidis curiously glanced at Lost being comforted by Enos and then back at me before asking, What happened? First, where's Essie? I asked with a frown. I tried to sense her aura, but failed to find her. She's sleeping in that room, Sidis replied, gesturing to the door behind him. I used my mana to cover the area, so you might not sense her presence. But she's there, don't worry. I see. I raised my brow in surprise. His veil is stronger than I thought. So? He asked. Emmy stared at me in curiosity as well. Well, after giving them a quick briefing on the situation, Enos had managed to somewhat calm Lost down. Emmy appeared to be in deep thought, while Sidis was constantly glancing at the massive exit door. Is there any chance they could be telling the truth? Emmy asked hesitantly. No. Lost immediately responded. She's not dead. I can feel it. Okay. I'm sorry. Emmy gives her an apologetic smile. But then why would they lie? Sidis asked. I'm not sure. I shook my head. Maybe they don't know? Enos scratched his head. Don't know what? Emmy raised her brow. Maybe they just lost contact with her mother and assumed she had died, he said. Maybe, but that still doesn't explain why they would lie about it, Emmy answered. That's assuming she's actually still alive. She murmured the last part under her breath, but I heard her. Any chance she's like that Emily girl? Rita joined. You mean from the King's faction? She nodded. Yes. Possible. Lost was confused at that and glanced at Enos, who happily began to explain everything to her. After a while, she turned silent. So you think this is what your mana wanted you to find? Sidis walked to my side and asked. Maybe? Doesn't it seem like too much of a coincidence otherwise? True. He nodded in agreement. Say, if her mother is really with the King's faction, and they knew that, why did they let her go? Emmy asked. Lost raised her eyes at that question, and I could see the confusion behind her gaze. Brita glanced at her and replied, she doesn't know anything. That and she was stuck near the void for a while. All of this thinking is making my head hurt. Enos groaned in annoyance. Brother, maybe we should just leave? Emmy asked. A sigh escaped my mouth, and I reluctantly nodded. Lost, I called out to her. That giant spire in the middle of the city. The one with all the beautiful lights. Yes. What do you know about it? I asked. It protects Faz and Inez as a whole, she replied. That's all. She seemed to think for a little while before adding. I remember my mom telling me that the old cosmic pillar built it for something. But I can't remember. She scratched her head with an embarrassed expression. That's okay, I smiled. I turned to the rest and spoke. Well, let's rest for the night. We'll take turns keeping watch. You can sleep if you want. I'm all right. Sidis shook his head. Brita didn't say anything and silently made her way to one of the rooms in the back. Emmy smiled at me and left as well, while Enos and Lost sat together on the couch talking. I took a deep breath and went to sit next to Sidis. I wasn't sleepy, nor was I tired. I'm sure none of us was, but it was best not to rush anything, and I still wanted to clear my mind before we decided on a plan. The night passed by uneventfully. Enos and Lost's hushed whispers never stopped until the sun was high in the sky. Meanwhile, neither I nor Sidis said a thing. We were quite content with the silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Soon, Brita got out of her room, followed by Essie, who happily jumped toward me, and finally, Emmy with a yawn. Slept well? I smiled and asked Emmy, who appeared to be having a hard time keeping her eyes open. Yawn. It was dash. Boom. The sound of a massive explosion rattled all of us. I hastily jumped to my feet. Sidis. Veil is still up. No one yet. I nodded. Emmy. Eyes on the entrance. Essie, cover her. Enos, Lost, cover the back. Brita with me. I quickly barked out orders, and everyone moved swiftly. Brother. Someone is coming from the front. Who is it? Emily. He replied just in time as her figure appeared and blasted the main door open. Time to go. Her voice was anxious with no hint of the playfulness it carried before. Boom. Another explosion rocked the air, causing me to curse. Damn it. Isn't this too fast? Chapter 457. Team Fight. Chapter 457. Team Fight. Now is not the time, move. We are leaving. Emily said as she glanced at the entrance with an anxious expression. What happened? I asked as I quickly summoned my cosmic mana. The tower is activated. You won't be able to teleport out of Inez anymore. We have to fly out. Emily replied. Boom. Move it. I turned to Brita and my siblings and nodded. Stay close. Brita, Sidis, Enos, just like before. I'll take the front. Enos answered. I'll cover us. Sidis added, and Brita gave me a solemn nod. Emmy. I turned to her, and she replied before I could answer. I'll provide support with Sidis. Just keep Essie close to you. Essie, on top? I said to our youngest, and she swiftly leaped on top of my head. Lost. I glanced at our newest addition. Why yes. Stay in the back, and whatever you do, Do not fall behind. Yes. Emily didn't say anything, and instead, she rushed outside. Enos followed right after her, then me. As soon as I stepped outside, an overwhelming smell of smoke and the sound of chaos filled my senses, making my heart race. It was as if the world had turned into a frenzy of flames and pandemonium. Countless buildings were on fire, and more had already collapsed. The massive, multicolored tower in the distance was shining with a blinding light. I could sense the overwhelming amount of cosmic mana rippling outwards all across Foz. What the? I didn't have time to think about it, as a sudden attack came from downwards. It was a familiar figure, Zephyrion. Emily, who was somehow flying without wings, changed directions midair and plummeted downwards to face the incoming masked god. Fly to the edge of the city. Don't go up. I'll hold him back. I didn't question her, nor did I hesitate. We were in no position for that. I can't let you do that, Emily. Zephyrion's voice was incomparably cold. His figure quickly turned translucent before he disappeared completely, right before Emily reached him. The dragoness seemed prepared, however, as she hastily turned around and sent two thin fire wisps aimed right at us. The wisps exploded just before reaching us, causing Zephyrion's figure to materialize and sending him spiraling into a building below. An enraged roar pulled my attention back to the front, where Enos's muscular body was now donned by an earth mana armor. An even larger golden dragon was standing in our way with a malicious grin. He reached out with his front claws and grabbed Enos's horns, effectively stopping him from advancing. His grin widened, but he failed to take us into account. Emmy turned into a streak of light, her speed almost impossible to follow with my eyes. The golden dragon was unable to react as she punched a hole through his chest. Her previously unblemished white scales were now dyed scarlet. Enos unleashed another roar and forcefully pushed his horns into the dragon's massive chest wound, separating his upper body from his lower. With that out of the way, we continued our flight. It wasn't long, however, before a massive hand swatted Enos to the ground. With all the chaos around us, he didn't spot the god hiding behind a large tower until it was too late. Enos, the god, was wearing full body armor with glowing runes carved into it. His size was massive, dwarfing all of us. He was about to follow with another attack when Essie made her move. The wind element swirled and formed a tornado that forcefully blocked his fist, giving Enos enough time to recover. Not only that, but she managed to push the deity away, causing him to stumble backward. That was all the opening Brita and Sidus needed. The goddess flashed and reappeared behind him, her spear aiming for his Achilles tendon. Golden blood spurted as the god collapsed to his knees, his armor doing nothing to stop the spear of the goddess of war. Sidus followed right after. His shadowy figure emerged out of the shade of the building and pounced for his neck. The deity panicked and tried to attack. I could see him summoning his divinity in his right hand, but I wasn't about to let that happen. My cosmic mana surged forth and forcefully broke his connection with his divinity. It was something almost impossible to do under normal circumstances, but alas, the deity was already injured and panicking. His right hand disappeared with a silent poof, and I could sense his confusion and disbelief right as Sidus tore through his neck with his claw coated in darkness mana. Emmy's figure flashed once more impossibly fast, leaving a massive hole in the deity's chest. No words were uttered as we quickly continued our escape. Lost's mouth was wide open in shock as she followed behind in disbelief. Enos took to the front once again, and Sidus disappeared back into the shadows. Just then, my eyes widened as I hastily yelled, "Wait!" Alas, I was too late. A sudden cage rose from the ground, with another falling from the sky. It was a trap. I expanded my cosmic mana and surrounded everyone just as the cages enclosed us. Did we get them? I don't think so, Dash. The dragon's words were cut short as I used my cosmic mana to send his head into oblivion. His headless corpse fell to the ground with a thud. His companion had no time to retaliate as I appeared right before him and bit through his neck. Essie, on top of my head, sent an incredibly sharp wind blade into his brain, killing him on the spot. A little warning next time would be great. Brita yelled out from behind me. No time for that. I gazed back at the ice dragoness and asked, "Lost, you okay?" Her face looked anything but okay, yet she still put up a brave front and nodded. "Why yes. The tower is interfering with my cosmic mana. I can only teleport us into short distances safely. The cosmic mana waves that the multicolored pillar was emitting were extremely strong. I frowned as I looked back at it. This feeling, it's similar to a teleportation portal. Is that what the tower is really for? It would make sense. No, it had to make sense. I was sure of it. The tower was a massive teleportation array. The question is, where to? With mana waves like that, I can only imagine how far the destination is. I hesitantly looked away. We have to focus on getting out of here first. I could see some dragons and deities fighting all across the city. Most, however, appeared to be clueless and confused as to what was going on. So not the entire city is on it. Chapter 458, Worse. Chapter 458, Worse. After our previous obstacle, no one came to stop us. The city was in chaos, and most of the citizens appeared to be confused as to what was happening. It was good for us as we escaped further amidst the confusion. Still, we remained on high alert, not allowing anyone to come close. Thankfully, no one spared us a second glance, and we all frantically tried to leave the city. Brother, we dash. Enos's words were cut abruptly as a large shadow pounced on him from the sky. We raised our heads just in time to see a massive red dragon collide against him, downing them both to the ground. Another building collapsed as they fell to the city, causing dust and rubble to hide their figures. I could only hear their roars, followed by a dragon breath that cut through the dust cloud and made its way to the sky. I was about to move when another silver dragoness appeared out of nowhere. She ignored us and dived right after the two. A mere second later, both she and the red dragon were tumbling to the ground, claws and teeth bared as they hacked and slashed against one another. Emmy's figure flashed as she appeared beside an injured Enos. Brother, she called out to me. My eyes were on the fight between the silver dragoness and the red dragon. Mana surged around the two as they continued their fight, hurling one spell after another at each other. Brita pushed me from the back. Not the time. I hesitantly nodded at her words and cast the silver dragoness one final look before I flew closer to Emmy, who was helping Enos. How are you feeling, muscle brain? I joked, but my expression was solemn. The scales on his side were burnt off, and I could see a tear in his left wing. Ugh, I'll live. I didn't see him coming. Sorry, brother. I shook my head. You did well. Turning my gaze to the back, I beckoned Lost over. Keep an eye on him, okay? I will. I can try to help him heal, she added. Good. I'll take the front. Essie, go with Emmy. Essie clearly did not want to do that, but seeing the serious expression on my face, she reluctantly hopped off and flew next to Emmy. I took the lead and continued our escape. With Enos out of commission, I extended my cosmic mana outwards as far as I could, with the pressure coming from the tower. That turned the area around me into a sort of soul space. It was strange, unlike what I had before, and unlike what anyone had, of that I was sure. It was not visible to the naked eye, but if one were to look at the mana, one would see the cluster of cosmic mana surrounding all of us, almost like an ocean. With my heightened senses, I chose to ignore the pull of the tower and instead focused on the area around us. Even now, the teleportation gate is constantly emitting cosmic mana. It even tried to disturb my control over my own. Luckily, however, I was not the same dragon I once was. Seeing us getting attacked caused the few citizens who were fleeing alongside us to move away from us with eyes full of suspicion. I didn't blame them. It was better that way. Just as I was thinking of that, a deity flew into my soul space. The second he did, his face immediately changed as he tried to turn around and escape. I didn't give him a chance to do that. My cosmic mana swarmed his body like a flood, and in just a second, what was left of a once imposing god was nothing but an arm. I didn't stop and caught the arm midair in my mouth and swallowed it. Seeing what happened to their companion, a few other gods hesitated to approach and instead kept their distance. One unlucky goddess, however, miscalculated the reach of my soul space, causing her to scream in agony as I tore her limbs apart, leaving only her soulless head. I didn't care if that was vicious. I needed to be even more brutal. I needed to leave a statement. Otherwise, they would never stop. Just as I was thinking, two red dragons flew from above and opened their mouths. I could see the dragon breath orbs materializing before them, but they were outside of my soul space. Ether, Brita called out. Ignore them, I replied calmly. Sidus glanced at them and then back at me before he nodded. Emmy didn't spare them a glance. Little Essie had a frown on her face. The second the two dragons released their breath attacks, it immediately disappeared. The two appeared puzzled as to what happened. Did he just teleport our attacks away? Damn it. How do they want us to stop him? Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by two dragon breath attacks, this time aimed at both of them. They couldn't react and could only stare in shock and disbelief as their attacks exploded against them. I didn't stop to see the damage that did, and instead continued leading the group out of the city. It was then that I caught sight of a familiar figure. I turned my head and watched a heavily injured Emily approach us. The fire wisps that usually floated around her were dim, and her expression was solemn. "Well, I'm totally not jealous of your mana's ability," she said. "Zephyrion?" I asked, changing the subject. Hearing that, Lost raised her head with a complicated face. Emily shook her head. "I couldn't kill him, but he's also injured. We have to get out of here before the big guys turn their gaze to us." I nodded. "Where to?" "A little planet where an old friend of your grandma lies." "Emily, what is going on?" I asked. "I really don't know. Irvi and Kalta somehow managed to turn on the portal. They weren't supposed to be able to do that, but they did. What's behind the portal? They think it's freedom, but as far as I know, it's hell." "Hell?" Emmy asked by my side. "Yes, I don't know what's on the other side. All I know is that the king had us stationed here to keep an eye on the portal. It was never meant to be opened." "Shades?" I asked. Emily turned strangely silent for a few seconds before she shook her head. "I think. Worse." Chapter 459, Ruined. Chapter 459, Ruined. After Emily joined us, our flight out of Foz continued undisturbed. It seemed like the other members of the king's faction managed to hold off our pursuers. My eyes glanced at Emily, who was breathing heavily by my side, before I asked tentatively, "Are you okay?" She shrugged and replied, "I'll live." I nodded and changed the subject. "Now what?" Foz was already behind us, and although we were outside of the city, the dome of cosmic mana that was emitting from the tower and surrounding it still felt oppressive. Emily turned and looked at it one final time before answering. "Now we leave." "Are you sure? Don't you have friends or comrades back there?" Emmy asked in curiosity. Emily shook her head. "They have their mission, and I have mine. Let's go." She then shot into the sky, and we hurriedly followed after her. Not long after, we found ourselves in the vast open space. I couldn't help but cast the Ain as a final glance. It felt as if I had missed something. I wasn't sure what exactly. "Come on, the planet we are heading to isn't too far." I nodded. "What will happen here?" I asked hesitantly. Lost perked at my question and stared at Emily. "I don't know. I already told you my mission, Dash." Her words were interrupted as my eyes widened in shock. Without any time for hesitation, I hastily summoned a shield using pure cosmic mana to direct the shockwave. The tower was glowing brighter than before. It was almost blinding. A wave of cosmic mana erupted outwards and flattened the entire city. It didn't stop and reached even us. Thankfully, I was prepared and managed to divert the blast without a problem. "What is he doing?" I muttered subconsciously as a familiar figure flew towards the tower. An ancient dragon with gray scales and an overbearing aura was soaring through the sky. Irvi. Although we were far away, I could still see his figure clearly. The old dragon had a maddened expression on his face. His entire body was brimming with mana, and even from here, I could sense his soul space burning. "What the?" Emmy mumbled by my side while Emily cursed. "Shit." Irvi appeared out of it as he flew above the ruined city. He didn't pay heed to anyone. His previously dull gray scales began to shine with a bright color as a mad laugh escaped his mouth. "Gone. It's all gone. Ha ha. So much time wasted for what? Ha ha." His eerie laughter echoed across the destroyed city as he continued toward the glowing tower. "We have to go." Emily cried out. "That crazy bastard is burning his soul space. He's going to self-detonate." The others panicked and turned to me, but I was mesmerized by the sight. He looked like a firefly heading to the sun. For some reason, I couldn't take my eyes off that scene. His aura kept growing the closer he approached the tower. I could see the cosmic mana fighting him off. Some of his scales began to disappear as he flew against the cosmic current. But Irvi was unbothered. The crazy look on his face intensified. "All gone. Ha ha ha." He kept repeating. I could see he was using his own mana to fend against the current. When a strand of cosmic mana aimed for his head, he countered by sacrificing a mana element of his own nullifying set attack. His control over his elements was on another level. Just the fact that he was able to continue approaching the tower with minimal injuries was a feat by itself. I was confident in doing the same. Hell, I was sure I could force myself into the tower with no injuries whatsoever, but that was different. I was a cosmic dragon. In a matter of seconds, Irvai was already upon the tower. Even with his massive body, he still looked like an ant in front of it. He didn't stop, and he didn't hesitate. He flew straight towards the source of colorful lights. For a split second, the world went silent. A burning dragon, a glowing tower, and then everything flashed black and white. Before I knew it, the entire plane was collapsing upon itself. An extreme sense of danger washed over me, and without hesitation, I reached out for my mana and teleported all of us away. When we reappeared, we were already a long distance away from where Inez was once. Nobody said a thing. Lost had a blank look on her face, and Enos was leaning on her, trying to console her. Let's go. We're not that far off course, thankfully. I looked at Emily, who had a somber expression, and asked, "You can tell where we are?" "To a certain extent." I nodded. "Lead the way." "Brother, what just happened?" Essie asked. I shook my head. "He self-destructed. Now Inez is gone." Sidis answered instead. Essie turned to him, and he shrugged. Irvai was an elder. That amount of power is normal. Emmy shook her head. "No. You're underestimating just how strong that old lizard was." I hesitantly nodded. "His control over mana was the best I've ever seen." Essie asked, "Even better than Grandma?" I paused before nodding. "Even better." Sidis frowned. "It doesn't matter anymore. He's dead now. And so is everyone in Foz," Emily added. Her words seemed to remind him that there were some of her companions back there, and he hastily apologized. "Ah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Emily waved him off. "It doesn't matter." Her playful tone was no more as she flew up front. "Good job." Emmy glanced at him and replied sarcastically. Our journey through deep space continued. Emily asked me to teleport us a few times, and before we knew it, we found ourselves staring at yet another planet. This one was blue. "An ocean world?" I asked, feeling nostalgic as I stared at the ocean-covered planet. "Yes, Sawa prefers to stay in water-based worlds." "Sawa?" Emmy asked. "That's his name. He was an old friend of your grandmother." Just as we were about to descend, I stopped and turned to look behind us. A familiar humanoid figure silently walked out. "A chronicle?" Emily sighed as the chronicle approached. "You need not take them any further. Sawa has already been informed of their arrival." Emily gave a slightly bitter smile and glanced at us. "I guess that's as far as my mission goes." Before I could say anything, Sidis spoke. "You're not coming with us?" "Nope. It seems like there's something else I need to do," she said and glanced at the chronicle, who remained silent. "You may go. The sovereign of the deep is already waiting." The chronicle told us as he approached Emily. "Will we see you again?" Sidis asked hesitantly. Emily flashed him a bright smile and replied, "Perhaps," saying that she lightly tapped Essie's snout and gave the rest of us a nod before she disappeared with the chronicle. "Well, let's go meet this sovereign of the deep." Brita, who has been silent all this time, spoke with a sigh. Chapter 460, Sawa. Chapter 460, Sawa. With me taking the lead, the group followed behind as we slowly descended to the ocean planet. The abundance of water mana was the first thing I felt as we broke through the atmosphere. Other elements were almost non-existent in this world. Had it been before when I still had my water mana, I was sure I would have loved this place. Now, however, I merely felt a sense of nostalgia. A sigh escaped my mouth at that feeling. Essie kept glancing around with a curious look. Out of everyone, she was probably the second most comfortable in this world. Wind mana was abundant as well, after all. Lost, however, essentially being a water dragoness would be the most in her element. Thankfully, none of us had fire mana. The water extended as far as the eye could see, but I could still sense the presence of who I assumed to be the sovereign of the deep, Sawa. He wasn't hiding his aura, so it was easy to find him. After a short flight, we reached a beautiful sight. "Wow," Essie muttered, and I couldn't help but nod in agreement. Before us, a dozen vast floating gardens. I was instantly captivated by the magnificence of it all. Colorful trees and flowers, all meticulously tended to. It gave off a feeling of harmony and serenity. For a moment, we simply stood there mid-air, taking it all in. It was until a voice broke us out of our reverie that we finally snapped out of it. "Well, are you coming down?" The voice had a faint fatherly tone to it. It was calm and pleasant to listen to. I scanned the gardens below and realized that the voice was coming not from there, but from under the ocean. I raised my brows in surprise as the water parted to reveal a magnificent palace underwater. "Sovereign of the deep, indeed," Brita mumbled. With me in the lead, we flew down toward the palace. The doors were already open and waiting for us. Essie's eyes were sparkling, and even Lost seemed to be in a slightly better mood as her gaze darted everywhere. Emmy and Sidis, however, were quiet. I didn't blame them. The others might not feel it, but the aura of this dragon we were about to meet was in no way inferior to that of Grandfather. Once we touched the ground, a cooling feeling washed over us. The mana here was gentle, soothing even. This only served to raise our vigilance. After all, just how good was this dragon's control over mana? I didn't know what to expect as we walked past the doors. A faint mana shield covered the entire palace, but it was harmless. Green, yellow, and orange flowers decorated the hall as we strolled inside. But my attention was instantly on the dragon that was standing before us. His scales were light blue, and he had a stern face as he looked at us. I didn't know why, but as I looked at him, it felt like the old dragon before me was akin to an old grumpy grandpa. I almost chuckled as I thought of that mental image. Shaking off those thoughts, I lowered my head in respect, and the others quickly followed suit. "A cosmic dragon, a darkness dragon, and a light dragoness," he said as he looked at me, and then Sidis and Emmy. His eyes wandered to the others before we could say anything. "A wind dragoness, earth dragon, and water dragoness." He nodded slightly before turning to Brita. The goddess nervously frowned under his gaze. "And a goddess," he nodded again. "An interesting bunch," he said with a hint of amusement. "Greetings, Dash." Sawa waved me off with his tail before I could continue. "No need for formalities here, child. I'm sure you had a long journey here," he said and looked at Lost, who had an empty look on her face before sighing. "Come," he gestured for us to follow. I looked at my companions, who shrugged and quickly pursued the old dragon. "The chronicles inform me of your situation," he sighed as we walked. "It seems like a heavy burden was placed on you younglings." He shook his head in disapproval. I didn't know what to say, so I remained silent as he talked. "Young ones should enjoy life instead of worrying about wars and battles." His tone was displeased as he spoke. Somehow, he reminded me of Grandma. Once we walked past the hallway, we reached a large open hall with massive windows that overlooked the bottom of the ocean. Dozens of fish could be seen swimming by. In the hall, 7 giant beds were placed on the ground, similar to what we had in Foz. "I didn't know I would be having guests, so you'll have to excuse my lack of hospitality," he said. I hurriedly shook my head. "Not at all. This is more than enough." "Good. Since you are all family, I hope you don't mind the lack of privacy. This one is the only hall I could spare. What about the other ones?" "The palace looks very big." Essie couldn't help but ask. Sawa smiled gently. "I use the other rooms to tend to my flowers." "Can I see?" she asked with sparkling eyes. Even Ino seemed interested as he edged closer. Sawa laughed and replied, "Of course, the entire palace is open for you. I would, however, have to ask you to be careful with them." Essie nodded. "Good. Well then, allow me to formally welcome you." "My name is Sawa." "The pleasure is ours," I replied. "There's not much to be done around here. I mostly tend to stay by myself. There is a piece of land not so far from here where a small number of mortals live. I don't go there often, and they cannot reach this place, so they don't bother me either." I nodded as he continued. "I'm not sure what plans the king has for you," he said in a complicated tone, "but you can rest here for now. If you need anything, just come and find me." "Thank you for having us," Emmy spoke. Sawa gave her a gentle smile, followed by a light nod before he turned and left. "Well, that was interesting," Emmy said. Sidis nodded. "He's strong." "He is. And it seems like he can control lightning as well," I answered. Essie agreed by my side. "Yes. It was very faint and hard to notice." "Really?" Enos muttered. "So that's what that was." Sidis mumbled in understanding. "At least it's nice in here." Brita joined in the conversation. "That it is." Enos guided Lost to one of the beds in the corner, where they both sat down. Essie rushed to the massive open window with her eyes practically sparkling. Emmy and Sidis both plopped down with long sighs almost simultaneously. "What are you thinking about?" Brita, who was still standing next to me, asked. I turned to look at her before answering. I think I'll go find Sawa first. There's a few things I want to ask. Brita nodded. Go on then. I cast one final glance at the group before I made my way out of the hall. I traced my steps back across the hallway, and once I reached the door, I teleported outside the palace. I reappeared above the ocean, glancing at the floating gardens. Sawa emerged from the water and flew toward me. It seemed like he was waiting for me. Young cosmic dragon, he said. I lowered my head slightly and replied, I have a few questions if you don't mind. Sure. Follow me.